On today's episode of Locked On Mets, I was joined by Mets beat writer Pat Ragazzo as we talked about some of the latest stories surrounding this team heading into the offseason. We discussed the qualifying offer situation with Michael Conforto and Noah Syndergaard. We talk about Marcus Stroman's free agency. And of course, we discussed the latest when it comes to the Mets' search for new members of their front office, a president of baseball operations, a GM, and even a manager. We get to it all on today's episode of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Once again, happy to be joined by Pat Ragazzo, Mets beat writer for SI. Going to talk about everything going on right now with the Mets heading into the offseason. As much as everyone's focused on the playoffs, I think anyone who's looking at the Mets has a lot to talk about right now when it comes to free agency in the front office. And I want to start off with some of your most recent reporting surrounding some of these impending free agents the Mets have. What is your take right now on the qualifying offer situation with Noah Syndergaard and Michael Conforto?
Well, yeah, perfect. And thanks so much for having me on again, Ryan. Of course, it's always a blast to be here. But yeah, we got the qualifying offer situations looming, and decisions are, being discussed right now internally. I heard from a team source from the Mets actually this morning that, there's still not much on that front right now regarding the QOs. The Mets are kind of discussing their plans for the offseason internally, and that includes the qualifying offers, which they will be eligible to extend those QOs after the World Series during that period. For Syndergaard and Stroman, I mean, there was a report recently where we heard the Mets intended to offer the QO at least to Conforto, and he's probably going to reject it and test the free agency waters. So, that report mixed with what I'm hearing that, the Mets haven't officially decided yet. I'm kind of getting the feeling that they are most likely going to extend both offers to each player right now. And, with Syndergaard too, they haven't made that decision yet, but it seems kind of like a no-brainer. Of course, we heard yesterday from ESPN that the QO actually is lowering from 18.9 mil last year to 18.4 mil this year. So a slight decrease. But really, Syndergaard wants to be a Met. He's made it clear multiple times that he's confident they'll reach an agreement. And I heard also from someone close to Syndergaard that while they haven't heard anything or received any indication that the Mets are going to offer, it's definitely a possible scenario that if they do offer, Syndergaard's going to accept it. So I think right now, based off everything that's out there, and we should know soon in the next couple of weeks or so, but seems like Syndergaard probably will stay on the qualifying offer, and Conforto will probably be extended it, but wind up maybe going elsewhere. And, the Mets would receive some draft compensation if that were the case for Conforto to leave after getting that QO offer.
It seems like with Syndergaard, I mean, he basically campaigned for it openly at the final couple weeks of the season, saying he wants to remain with the Mets. It would be a blessing to receive the qualifying offer. So it seemed for a while now like that is gonna come to fruition here, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we bring in the Stroman part of this conversation. But with Conforto, what's interesting about that report is you do wonder where it came from and what would be the benefit of that report getting out there about him declining the qualifying offer. Is there a chance that that might be a little bit of smoke and mirrors and that he accepts the qualifying offer, or because you're looking at an outfield market that really is pretty bare? You're talking about Starling Marte, who I believe just turned 34, Nick Castellanos, not a great defensive outfielder. Really, you can make an argument when you look through all of the outfielders that are in free agency that Conforto is still a viable candidate to get a deal for multiple years at close to that qualifying offer number anyway. Does it still seem like his market's going to be good enough where Conforto can decline it and get a contract elsewhere?
Well, despite the down season he had, career worst season he had at the plate this year, I think based off his track record, he certainly believes that he could draw a long-term deal and something in his range that he's looking for this winter based off what he's accomplished in the past. And of course, he's represented by Scott Boras. So, Scott Boras isn't just going to be one to settle. and he's going to try and get his client, the highest deal possible. So I think Conforto definitely wants to explore that avenue despite having the down year. And, it does make sense for him to accept the qualifying offer and rebuild his value next year and then get, set himself up for an even bigger payday next year. But maybe that's more so the reason that if he's looking for something else, in the long-term front, that maybe it would include opt-outs after the second year or whatever it may be. I mean, Conforto's 28, so if he were to stay with the Mets for another year or take another one-year deal elsewhere to build up his value, maybe on a contending team, if he goes to an already built contender, would probably, help his performance, I would imagine. So he also said that too, as well, that he's prioritizing winning. And obviously the Mets have a lot of question marks. And it all starts with who they're going to bring in for as the president to run things. But the Mets aren't necessarily as close to winning as some of the other teams out there that might be looking for Conforto's services. So even if he rejects it, I mean, there's still a chance that he could come back if another team isn't willing to give up a draft pick for him, considering the season that he just had. But I guess he's definitely going to at least seemingly test it to see what he can draw out there. And you mentioned Syndergaard as well. I mean, Syndergaard missed 2 full seasons and came back for 2 appearances at the end of the year and didn't have his slider or his curveball, which he says will be back next year. But for Syndergaard, the qualifying offer, making $18 million next year to rebuild his value, seems almost too good to be true at age 29 years old. And the Mets are the only team he's played with in the big leagues, and he loves it here and he wants to stay. And it's kind of like a low risk, high reward for the Mets in a way, because if he does get back to being that top end starter, it'll only make the rotation even better, especially with the question marks surrounding Jacob deGrom. So obviously, like, that's a lot of what ifs that you're counting on for deGrom and Syndergaard to get back to pitching at that level next year and go through the season without any health issues based off the last couple of years. But at the same time, like, it just kind of points to Syndergaard most likely having a strong chance of coming back on the QO as long as the Mets offer it to him. And Conforto probably just seeing what's out there and testing the waters, and maybe he comes back, maybe he doesn't. But based off some of the comments he made and the emotions from his potentially his final home game in Citi Field on the last homestand of the regular season, my gut personally, I feel like Conforto is probably leaving, and I think he knows that his time is done here, and he's kind of ready to turn the page and move on to the next chapter here. So that's definitely, I think, something that could be realistic and that we wind up seeing playing out that way.
One reason to repair and maintain your cars is to save money. So why would you choose to spend 30%, 50%, maybe even 100% more for the exact same amount of parts at a chain store or new car dealership when you can just go to rockauto.com, a family business that has been serving auto parts customers online for 20 years. They have everything you could want, from engine control modules to brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. The rockauto.com catalog is unique and remarkably easy to navigate. Quickly see all the parts available for your vehicle, then choose the brand, specifications, and prices you prefer. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right locked on in there. How'd you hear about us box? So they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense for Conforto. There's a lot of options for him going to another contender, even going to a team where he can play out, like you said, with an opt-out in a more hitter-friendly ballpark. That could be a smart thing for his career. When you talk about Noah Syndergaard and accepting the qualifying offer, he just saw how that could play out with Marcus Stroman, right? I mean, this was a guy that didn't pitch in 2020, got hurt, decided because of COVID it was best to just opt out of the season. He decides to take the qualifying offer, rebuild his value. It's a high-pressure situation to go into a season like that, but Stroman just showed that you can do it. And I do think these are pitchers that maybe have a similar mindset when it comes to working and the way they build themselves up going into a season. So I can absolutely see why Syndergaard would want to bet on himself. Marcus Stroman just made that bet and is about to cash in. What are you hearing about his market heading into free agency?
Right. So the belief around the league right now is that Stroman's probably going to draw a minimum of $25 million a season. Potentially across maybe 5 to 6 years. He could get 4 as well. I mean, he is, I believe, set to turn 31 in May of next season. So teams might be, a little bit skeptical of giving him maybe 5 or 6 years, but that's kind of what his market kind of seems like, the ceiling right now. So that's just the way things have been going with pitchers. You see guys like Garrett Cole and some of the other big names get these huge contracts that Stroman, it seems like the way the market is going, could, potentially get that $25 million offer, even if it's across 4 seasons, maybe 4 years, $100 million. And the Mets made it clear too that they're looking forward to talking to him and going to the table and seeing if they could work something out. But at the same time, considering how thin the starting pitching market is again this offseason, Stroman might be one of the guys who winds up making or earning himself probably one of the highest contracts out there in free agency. So that could be a reason why he doesn't stick around with the Mets. But I think the Mets are definitely gonna they're gonna make a go at bringing him in. And of course he's not an ace and he's not a number one starter, but he's a really good number two starter, and he would definitely help out the Mets rotation, especially if having that question mark surrounding DeGrom and Syndergaard and Taijuan Walker as well, who was the third starter in the Mets rotation until the second half when he gave up 20 home runs. And a guy like Carlos Carrasco, who was expected to be like a number 3 starter, also didn't pitch that way. So the Mets just have a lot of uncertainty surrounding their rotation, and Stroman kind of is the sure thing there, although he's not an ace and he doesn't make up for the loss of Jacob deGrom. I mean, nobody does. And you could honestly go back and look at the season and see where it fell apart for the Mets. And yes, the hitting never came around, but deGrom, missing out on 15 to 16 starts the rest of the way really hurt the Mets. I mean, that's 15, 16 more games that they would have had a strong chance to win and potentially could have been in it in the end or even made the playoffs if they didn't lose him. And it seems like when they lost him, the rest of the pitching staff didn't pitch as well as they did without deGrom. And of course, you were missing that dominance every fifth day. So yeah, I think when you're looking at it, and with Stroman, like he's going to be pricey, and that could be the reason why he leaves. The Mets could get outbid in a way, and they do have a lot of other holes to kind of address this offseason. So it's going to be interesting to see how all that plays out. But yeah, Stroman bet on himself, and he's going to get paid handsomely this offseason, and he deserves it, whether it be with the Mets or another team.
Absolutely. I think there's been a lot of talk about what he's worth, and I've talked about in this show. I don't think fans fully grasp what it's like to A, make it to the big leagues, B, fight through and be a starting pitcher at the big, like every step that you have to go across to be able to take the ball every fifth day. I mean, that is a skill when it comes to being a starting pitcher, being able to be durable and to be counted on for 170, 200 innings. And Marcus Stroman has shown over his career that he can be healthy and that he can take the ball every fifth day and give yourself a chance to win. And that's what makes him so valuable, whether it's as a legitimate ace or just a guy who's an ace for a team that's not quite, let's just say if Stroman were to sign with the Cubs or the Reds. I mean, those are teams that he could still theoretically be an ace on a team that's contending for a playoff spot, or on a great team, he is a great number 2. So I think Stroman, as you mentioned, is going to have a great market. I think he deserves that market, and whatever he gets, it's certainly going to be warranted. But when you're the Mets right now and you're trying to weigh all your options, it does seem to me, and this is just maybe my gut reaction, like we're heading towards a place where Marcus Stroman is going to sign elsewhere because of Noah Syndergaard coming back on the qualifying offer, even though you have just a ton of question marks with, as you say, the injury concerns with Syndergaard, deGrom, Carrasco in his mid-30s, Taijuan Walker's inconsistency. What are you going to get out of Peterson and McGill? I still wonder if they're going to have 5 pitchers making upwards of, I mean, Walker's the least of it, Carrasco somewhere in the mid-10s, but you're talking about Syndergaard, Stroman, deGrom. That's a lot of money. I just don't know if they're going to commit that much resources in that one part of their ball club when, as you said, there's a lot of holes to fill.
You're right, yeah, but on the other hand, too, starting pitching is arguably the most important,
For sure.
position group, and you can never have too many starting pitchers. And I think the Mets, to set themselves up nicely enough, they're going to need to have McGill and Peterson ideally be the 6 and 7 guys as your depth there, because you don't know what you're going to get from them, especially with the season Peterson had and the injuries, and McGill pitched more innings than he ever did, coming off not pitching a single inning last year with the minor league season canceled. And McGill obviously threw more, shattered his career innings record at any level in the pros and across the minors and the majors. Of course, this is his rookie year. So Stroman, yeah, you're right. As he would cost a lot, and the Mets would be investing a lot in there. That kind of also makes me think too that there's guys like Kevin Gausman and Robbie Ray who are available too, who both had Cy Young type seasons. And Gaussman specifically had a career season at age 30 and is setting himself up for a nice payday. But at the same time, these guys haven't necessarily dominated for a long enough time that they're not as much of a sure thing, honestly, as Stroman is, as we know what Stroman is at this point. And really, the only knock against Stroman is that he doesn't necessarily go too deep into games. He only pitched into the seventh inning a couple times this year, maybe the eighth inning once or twice. And that's kind of a thing that people aren't in love with about him. But at the same time, if he goes out there, gives you between 5, 6, maybe 7 occasionally innings, gives up 2 runs usually consistently, and if you have a good enough offense giving him run support, I mean that's going to give you a pretty good shot to win too as well. So I guess another case too that you could think of when you're thinking about giving that contract to Stroman and what he brings to your rotation.
All eyes are on the gridiron as teams are back for the start of another football season. And as always, BetOnline is your number one spot for all the pro and college football action this season. With the new updated site and interface, there's now even more odds, props, and contests available at betonline.ag, which continues to be your number one source for everything football. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive your 100% welcome bonus with the promo code NFL100. That's double your initial deposit just for signing up. From football, basketball, boxing to baseball, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. And I also think that when you have your best player being Francisco Lindor, a pitcher like Marcus Stroman just makes a ton of sense as a ground ball guy. I think that's part of what helped Stroman put together such a good season this year was an improved defense behind him with Lindor and eventually Baez and Guillorme getting a lot of playing time as well. So it's going to be fascinating watching what all of these free agents are going to end up doing. The Mets have so many decisions to make. And the first part of it is getting the decision makers here that are going to decide what to do with all these guys. What is your latest take right now on the Billy Beane situation and maybe some others that are still in the playoffs that could factor into the Mets front office search right now?
Yeah, so we heard a nice little nugget from John Harper of SNY last night that he apparently had been talking to 2 very close, longtime friends of Billy Beane, who revealed that Beane is very much interested in coming to the Mets and running their baseball operations department. And the plan for him would be to hire a GM to run more of the day-to-day duties below him, which is kind of like how he's set up as the VP of baseball ops in Oakland right now. Is he's not doing as much of the day-to-day anymore like he used to. So that's definitely intriguing enough that Billy Beane, wants to come here. His career would be full circle. The Mets drafted him number 1 overall in that 1980 MLB draft, and started his career in the front office with Sandy Alderson being his mentor, giving him the first shot in Oakland. And Beane's legacy isn't solidified yet. He doesn't have a championship, and he hasn't even been to a World Series. So I think that this is his last shot at 59 years old to head out a big market team in the Northeast, one of the most valuable franchises in professional sports, with one of the most richest, if not the richest owner in sports and in baseball right now, who are willing to spend no payroll constraints right now. And I think that's definitely enticing enough for Beane to kind of jump ship. And the Mets, of course, need to ask permission to John Fisher, the A's owner. But I think Beane's done enough that if Beane wants to go, I think Fisher will let him, especially since he has David Forst, their general manager, right now waiting in the wings to promote him, which was probably an imminent move anyway with Beane's contract expiring after next year. So I see that kind of Beane as a very realistic target right now. If these reports are true that he's, at least very interested in the job right now that's available. So I could definitely see that happening. And then when you look at some other candidates, a guy like David Stearns, now the Mets are going to try and get permission again this year, which they were denied last year, but they'll try and get permission again this year with David Stearns having 1 more year on his deal as well. But he's had great success in Milwaukee, and they made the playoffs 4 straight years. He's built something really, good out there, a sustainable playoff contender, which is hard to do over there with the Milwaukee Brewers, but he's done it. And I don't really see Stearns as realistic right now, and I don't even know if the Mets will get permission to speak to him, but they're obviously going to try now that Milwaukee's eliminated from the NLDS. And then a couple more realistic candidates, though, are we heard Josh Burns, the VP of baseball ops with the Dodgers, and assistant general manager Brandon Gomes, who apparently played a large hand in the trade to acquire Max Scherzer and Trey Turner at the trade deadline in July. And Gomes was a reliever in the MLB for a long time. And after he retired, he joined the Dodgers front office, and he's really risen through the ranks there pretty quickly over the course of the past couple of years. So I could see a guy like Gomes maybe being a GM. I think he's ready for a GM role as opposed to the president's role. The Mets are targeting him, but I don't think he'll wind up being their number one guy unless they're blown away by him and they can't get maybe someone else they had their eyes on. But Burns, I think, would be a pretty good target. And the MLB rule actually is you can't poach away more than one executive from the same team in the same offseason. So it's either going to be Burns or Gomes if the Mets do make one of those hires. And Burns, if they don't get Bean, I think Burns would be a good candidate for the president's role. But if they do get Bean, I think either or Gomes or Burns could be, money for the GM role. And depending on if they're interested in, taking on those roles and working under Bean and potentially building something special with the Mets, where, if you win a championship here, it's very impressive, more so than elsewhere, and the biggest market, highly profitable organization in the New York Mets, and making them winners could really go a long way and just kind of solidify all of their legacies together, into baseball immortality, which is definitely, enticing enough, especially with having Steve Cohen as the owner. So I think right now, before we hear any other names pop up, I think right now Bean, Burns, and Gomes are three pretty realistic candidates. And I really don't think Stearns is going to leave Milwaukee.
Yeah, I don't think Stearns will either. Again, not necessarily his choice, but I don't know if he'll even get the permission. Billy Bean, I think one thing I've been kind of cautioning the listeners of this show when it comes to Billy Bean is this idea that he is the same guy he was, played by Brad Pitt in Moneyball. I mean, Billy Bean, as you said, has had more of an overseer role. He's been very similar to Sandy Alderson was last year with the Mets. He's at the top. He's the big name, the face, but he has had a lot of great executives file in under him that have made the A's consistently one of the smarter front offices that's cutting edge year over year, that's always competitive. I think he can do that in New York, but when you hire Billy Bean to be the president, I become very interested in who that GM is going to be. So if you tell me you can get Billy Bean and you can get Gomes or you can get Burns, I mean, to me, that is an absolute home run. You're able to get executives from multiple teams. And I do think another big part of this process, why it could be a little bit more drawn out, is I do think it's important for the Mets to talk to as many different candidates for as many different teams as possible. This is an opportunity to get some information on how some of these teams are operating. And I think you should definitely take advantage of that. So I think this is a process that it needs to at least be expedited a little bit as you get into the offseason. You don't want it to linger, but you also want to do your due diligence. What do you think about a potential timeline here for how long this is going to take as the Mets head into the offseason?
I think you hit it on the head that the Mets do need to do their due diligence here, and they can't just rush the hire. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, free agency begins in November, and they'd like to have someone in place and like to, bring on a manager maybe by then as well. So maybe I would say in the next month or so, hopefully the Mets will have this cleared up. But at the same time, yeah, they can't rush. And when you look at a guy like Billy Bean as well, I mean, you bring in Bean, you could potentially have Bob Melvin follow him as the manager too, which seems like it would be a pretty good fit. I mean, those two have been together since 2011. They've endured 7 winning seasons and 6 playoff appearances with a bottom 5 payroll every year in the MLB. So not having those kind of budget constraints coming here could be, an attractive offer for both of those guys. The Mets would have to trade for Bob Melvin, and it also depends on what they'd have to give up. But at the same time, I think if Melvin's going to be the manager, it's because Bean, is in as president here. And I really just think that, that would be a good way to go. And if that'll happen, I don't know. But, at the same time, we should know hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yeah, it's so many different layers to this offseason for the Mets. This is the time right now they got to get everything solidified from the top down. President, GM, manager. It's going to be a busy, busy offseason before you even get to free agency. So looking forward to continuing to talk to you throughout this offseason. Pat, why don't you let everyone know where they can find all your work?
Sure. Yeah. Well, you can check out my site on Sports Illustrated and Fan Nation inside the Mets. The URL is si.com/MLB/Mets. And you can follow my work on Twitter at Ragazzo Report, Ragazzo Report. And Ryan, thanks so much for having me on. I'm definitely looking forward to more of these discussions as things kind of progress this offseason. It's definitely going to be a busy one.
For sure. And I'll make sure to leave that link to your site on SI in the description on YouTube here. So, as always, thank you again. This is another conversation with the Mets beat. Appreciate you having you on as always. That's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. On tomorrow's show, we will have our Friday Farm Report with Jordan Grossman, as we're going to be giving away some awards for the Low A Mets. Who was the best pitcher? Who was the best hitter? And more. Check out the show tomorrow to find out. And also for your second listen today, check out Locked On MLB. Sully's got you covered for all the news when it comes to the MLB playoffs. Got a big Game 5 in the NLDS between the San Francisco Giants and the Los Angeles Dodgers. Tune in to Locked On MLB for your coverage of that and everything else going on with playoff baseball this October.